high tide very early in the morning, if indeed in those areas of this island, which is really the larger areas that aren't protected by this seawall, where there's a lot of development. Are they worried about the storm surge at that point? Is it going to pour over like so many people had feared?
You know, it certainly could, but I doubt it. I think the heaviest storm surge is going to be on the right side of the eye as it moves into Louisiana. The storm surge map does show that most of this is actually going to be east of Port Arthur, east into Lake Charles. That's where the 10 to 14-foot storm surge will be. Port Arthur, right over to Holly Beach, Cameron, and all the way over to Lake Charles. That's your 14, maybe 18-foot storm surge. But Galveston, I think your storm surge will only be about 5 feet, maybe as much as 8 feet. And with a 17-foot wall, I think maybe you'll get splashing over it, but you're not going to get it breached.
I think one thing people are also concerned about, if indeed this is moving as slow as you said, and if it rains a great deal, I presume that's also going to cause some flooding as well.
Sean, that is going to be probably the biggest story after this goes by. This storm, although it's moving at 12 miles per hour right now, gets to about Texarkana and literally stops. There's going to be a high pressure. It's going to kind of look like a big banana. And that high pressure is going to stop it from going east, stop it from going west, and stop it from going north. So it bumps into this bumps into this high, and it stops. And for 72 hours, it's raining here. And some computer models now putting out 25 inches of rain in the area from Port Arthur northward, right up the Sabine River, right into Texarkana, Shreveport, maybe as far west as Dallas, maybe as far east. Could be inches of unexpected rain in New Orleans before that storm finally just diminishes intensity and kind of washes out.
Well, that is going to be miserable for the people here thinking that storm just sitting here for days and days and days. Chad, we're going to check in with you shortly. Sean, with you as well. Right now, let's go back to Aaron in New York.
Thank you. I was just thinking of what Sean was talking about the building collapse, wall collapsing of the building in Galveston. In all of these cities all along the coast, things are happening. And as Gary Tuckman mentioned, in fact, at some point when the light comes up tomorrow, they're going to look very different than they looked tonight. And we just have to wait and see how much damage has been done all along the Gulf. In Baytown, Texas tonight, Randy Kay, I guess it's early this morning now, Randy Kay is in Baytown. When last we saw you, you were basically just trying to hold your ground.
And that's exactly what I'm still trying to do, Aaron. It's hard to believe, you know, here in Baytown, we are about an hour west of Beaumont. And so it's really hard to believe that we're actually on the weaker side of the storm because we're seeing some pretty hefty wind gusts right now. I talked to the city manager here in Baytown a short time ago, and he told me that right about this hour is when they were expecting gusts to get pretty high. They were expecting maximum gusts overnight tonight of about 80 miles an hour, they thought. So I don't think we're there yet, obviously. I think we have a ways to go, but it's certainly pretty strong right now. Believe it or not, we're in sort of a funky power situation here. The power in our hotel is back on, and even the power in a couple of signs around on the streets here is actually back on, which is very interesting. Also, the flagpoles here, they are still standing. They're 10 feet deep into the ground, although we did lose the Comfort Inn's flag, but we still have the United States flag and the Texas flag still there. Over here, we still have these palm trees. It's pretty hard to turn actually into the wind, but if you take a look at those palm trees, Aaron, you remember when we talked a little while ago, those palm trees certainly weren't blowing in the wind as wildly as they are actually now. So, and there's also, I know there's been a lot of talk about debris and things flying around in the night, and what we're hearing a lot of are just strange noises. We think a dumpster back there in the distance is being pushed actually by the wind. Its doors swinging open, but also actually being pushed. We've seen the transponders going out. We're not only seeing the transponders and the lights in the sky turning bright blue, but we're also hearing them. So it is somewhat concerning out there. This is a community that has experienced many hurricanes over the years. Carla is something that they still talk about, Hurricane Carla back in 1961. And Aaron, it was a very different picture here back then. From what the fire marshal tells me, it was mostly rice fields, and those rice fields have now been replaced by subdivisions. So it's a very different picture here. Many of those people living in those subdivisions, though I'm told, did evacuate, which is very good news. And also the power plants and the oil refineries and the plants along the ship channel here, where Baytown sits on the Houston ship channel, that 50-mile stretch of waterway, about 200 plants. They also have shut down, trying to prepare just in case the Hurricane Rita comes in real strong, make sure there isn't any damage there. Aaron?
You've done a lot of reporting, actually, on the refinery situation, which is, for good reason, of great concern to people all over the country because it impacts the price of gas, which will go up, and we'll see how much. It's not quite as simple. It actually is sort of simple to shut them down. It's not very simple to start them up.
Right. In fact, we talked to the manager of the Shell plant, and he told me there was another transformer that just blew. Sorry about that. He told me that in fact they shut down their plant in about 24 hours, but it could take them anywhere from 5 to 7 days to actually get the plant going again. And the other issue is it depends on how much damage might occur out in the ship channel and whether or not they'll even be able to get the oil that they need, not only to refine but also the oil that they need to actually run their operations. So they said they could be shut down anywhere from a week to a few months. It all depends on how much damage there is. And here in this area, more than 25% of the oil is produced for the world right from here, the gasoline.
Just so people are clear on this, the oil, the crude comes in on tankers and it goes out in pipelines?
That's correct. It goes out for different parts of the country and different parts of the world out by pipeline, but it comes in on these ships. And he said they can only run for about 5 days before they need more oil. So if that oil can't go in, we're really in trouble here. And
obviously it's quite windy where you are. It doesn't look to be as rainy as it's been in other scenes we've seen tonight.
No, it's not as rainy as other areas, but this is probably the most rain that we've seen. You know, there's been a lot of talk about this storm once it hits the land and it's going to stall over the area. We're not sure how much rain we're actually going to get here. They are expecting a storm surge of anywhere from 10 to 13 feet, they thought. They think they could get in some of the lower lying areas here in the Baytown area. They could get anywhere up to a foot of rain. But if you look out over into the parking lot area out there, I'm not sure if you can see it clearly, but the rain is certainly blowing out there just on the pavement. But you know, if you stand out here long enough, it hits you pretty hard. It feels like it's just kind of sort of like nails on your back if you keep your back into it, which is obviously the most preferable way to stand out here in a hurricane.
Randy, stay safe here. It's going to get tough for a couple of hours. Baytown is about 25 miles or so to the east of Houston. Miles O'Brien joins us for the first time tonight. Miles is in Lumberton. I guess we're letting Zarella dry off for a bit.
Yeah, Zarella is taking a break. This is really starting to whip here. Aaron, we're talking right now about 30, 40 knot gusts. And the eye wall, as you've been saying, as it comes across Sabine Pass, is about 90 miles away. So we are, as they say, it's about an 85-mile swath of hurricane force winds, and we're at the leading edge of the tropical force right now. So in the next few minutes, we're really going to get a battering here, because we're told, as you know, that there's 120-mile-an-hour winds in that swath, 85 miles around the wall of Rita. The power's out here. We had a generator, we thought, at the police station here. That's gone out. I just talked to some of the police officers. They say about 90% of this community of about 9,000 evacuated. They haven't heard a single call from anybody riding out the storm. We are about 30, 40 feet above sea level here, so we don't anticipate seeing any storm surge here. But the rain is just coming down in sheets now. I don't know what kind of rain Randy was experiencing there, but just sheets and sheets of rain, which is causing a lot of localized flooding here. I don't see any signs, just looking around here, of sign damage, but as we say, I'm just kind of on the leading edge of those strong hurricane force winds. This is the main street back here. We're kind of just watching for the usual kinds of things that go first, the signage and so forth. And so far, everything is intact here. But I think we're just at the beginning of what lies ahead here. It's going to be kind of a long haul over the next 3 hours, Aaron.
Yeah, actually, Miles, I've had a sense that we're sort of at the end of the beginning. That we're moving into a new phase of this. It's the middle phase. It's the nasty phase. It's going to go on for several hours. You're going to be right out in it. And that's sort of the moment we find ourselves in right now.
Yeah, you know, and I've been thinking about, as I woke up just a little while ago, trying to get a little bit of rest, we ran into earlier today much of the emergency services, the police and fire for Port Arthur and some of the communities down right on the coast there where storm surge would be a real big problem. And they have evacuated all their equipment here, their fire trucks and their police officers and their police vehicles. They're going to ride out the storm in this part of the world, and then as soon as they feel it is safe, they're going to head back in. But as they said that as they, there were several hundred people who, against their better advice, and they literally told them to put their licenses in their socks so they could identify their bodies, decided to ride out this storm. And I just thinking about what we're just experiencing, the edge of this, what that must be like 90 miles down, and more importantly about 40 feet below us. It's hard to imagine what's going on right now.
Miles, it's good to have you with us for a while. Actually, we heard a report, I don't remember the city, but someone said, okay, well, if you want to stay here, you don't want to evacuate, write your Social Security number on your arm so that we can identify you if that need be. Gary Tuckman's in Beaumont, Texas. Beaumont's been battered. That's where Anderson is also. Beaumont's been battered for a good length of time here. Gary, it doesn't look any more pleasant right now.
No, Aaron, I would say at this point it's the worst we've seen so far. This is a meteorological maelstrom right now. All throughout downtown Beaumont, where we are now, shutters are coming off of buildings, glass is breaking from office buildings. We see canopies from banks and a gas station nearby that have already come down. These are things we're used to seeing, but one thing I never get used to, no matter how many hurricanes we're in, is this sound. It's a sound that sounds like jet planes are flying above your head. And even though you know that's the sound of the hurricane moving in, your instinct is to look up and think, where's the airplanes? And obviously there's no airplanes flying, but it's a very eerie sound when you hear what sounds like airplanes. Behind me, something very interesting. There's a clock. The clock says 1:13 a.m., and that's what's amazing, that despite these conditions, which have continued to deteriorate, we've had now up to 80-mile-per-hour gusts here, the power is still on here in Beaumont. This is one of the few times I ever remember this much rain, this much wind, and this much power. It has now been raining constantly hard for 10 hours since 3 o'clock Central Time this afternoon. And of course, we aren't even at the worst of it yet. According to Chad, that's still a couple of hours away here for Beaumont. But the conditions are very bad. We haven't seen, except for one guy on a bicycle about an hour ago, anyone on the streets whatsoever. No cars coming down. We're in the heart of downtown Beaumont right now, where normally this area where I'm standing right now, according to the people who run the stores in this block and the restaurants, there are usually 50 to 60 bikers out here. There's a couple of biker bars, some restaurants, some dance clubs. And right now, of course, with these conditions, it's eerily quiet. We are glad to see that there really is nobody out here. Aaron, back to you.
Just because of the video phone that you're using, it's a little hard to tell exactly where you are. Are you in the middle of the street? Are you standing right basically in the middle of a street?
And that's a good point, Aaron. Right now, I am standing in the middle of a cobblestone street that at night becomes a pedestrian mall and a motorcycle area. So yeah, this is the middle of the street where normally on a Friday night you would never be able to stand because motorcycles and people would be coming up and down this road.
Gary, thank you very much. Gary Tuckman, who is in Beaumont, Texas. Gary's covered a bunch of these hurricanes out of our bureau in Atlanta. Sean Caleb's is in Galveston, Texas tonight. It's been a very active night, though we suspect that when light comes across the Gulf tomorrow, we'll find out about a lot of things like you've experienced, wall collapses, a fire over here, a roof coming off over there.
Yeah, it's kind of odd because I'm sure we're going to see damage that is this bad or worse in a lot of the areas. It's just that perhaps we've been lucky. We went in to ask the officials the latest information, and when they went in, that's when the firefighters are running out of the elevator, and just using instinct, we followed them to see where they were heading, and that's how that happened. The building collapsed. Basically, the authorities just pulled up to where that was on 23rd Street. They got out, took a look at it, got back in their vehicles, and left. At this point, there's really nothing else they could do. They didn't even bother cleaning the streets. There's so much debris out there. Rain has been coming down very steadily for a long time. The ground's simply saturated. At some point in the near future, we're going to get to the point where there's really nowhere else for this water to go. I think that's when we're going to start seeing some flooding in the higher areas. When I say higher, the highest point on this island is only about 22 feet. But we know there's flooding on the east and western area that are not protected by that flood wall or seawall that extends 10 miles on this barrier island. It's about 31 miles long. And on the bay side, where this wind, as Chad has been explaining to us, is blowing in, we've had some people come back in, and they tell us that already flood water is up pretty much about calf level on some of those streets back in there. So certainly that's got to be very disappointing news. And we have talked to, I'd say, probably a dozen families that indicated they were going to stay here for one reason or another, including some that live near the bay. And there was one couple, they wanted to leave, but yesterday they saw just how bad the interstates were. They don't have air conditioning in the vehicle. It's broken at this point. And the wife in the family has difficulty breathing, so they chose not to try to make a run into Houston or Dallas or something like that to ride this out. They were somewhat concerned about it. They did everything that they could, and they are close to a shelter. But the real concern is that this water starts moving up into there. No one wants to see anything like we saw in the New Orleans area, although certainly from what Chad and everybody have been telling us this evening, that's not going to be a concern, but it has to be terrifying for some of those families that are trying to ride this out. We've talked about the noises we hear out here. Well, in a house with maybe a candle and things hitting the side of the house, maybe shingles blowing off, it's got to be a very, very, very tough evening.
I suspect that's true. If somebody can check on what the weather's like in Houston. Houston's only about 50 or so miles from Galveston. I'd be interested to know what the weather is like up there. You filed a story for us yesterday, I believe, about a young man, a 30s or so fellow who lived in a high-rise, and he'd sort of gotten his six-packs and his chips and his food, and he was going to ride it out. Do we know anything about that building and whether those buildings are okay?
Yeah, his name's Philip Klinge, and he is in a building not really far from where we are now, and he was only concerned about the storm surge. And from everything we've been hearing, it's not even a factor at this point. That building is basically a fortress in the way he describes it. And this is a guy who is in the building business. He understands a bit about it. He wasn't that concerned about weather like this. If they would have had Hurricane 5, Category 5, then it would have been a much greater concern for him. But this is somebody who was going to pull those aluminum shutters closed, lock himself in, and just wait till the power went off. And if things did get bad, if they had winds of 120, 130 miles an hour that maybe peeled those back, he had a bedroom well inside, and he was just going to hunker down in there. As that word hunker down I was trying not to use. But I'm sure that we tried to call him earlier, but cell service is almost non-existent here. We didn't reach him. We tried to call about 4 of the people we have spent time with. The only person we could reach was someone with the Galveston Independent Public School District. The school district here has its own police entity, which is responsible for overseeing the shelter. And to give you an idea of how many people left this island of 60,000 people, a few hours ago there were only 61 people in that shelter. So really a good indication that people did heed the warnings. They did see the pictures in Louisiana, and they got to safety.
Sean, thank you very much. Sean Caleb's in Galveston. We were wondering about the situation in Houston. Houston is about 50 miles or so from Galveston, a little bit mostly to the north. It's not an awful night there, and it's not a pleasant night there. Peak winds at about 51 miles an hour, and it looks pretty rainy. And the other thing you notice about Houston, which is, after all, the 4th largest city in the country, it's empty. I mean, there's nobody out there tonight at 1:15, 1:20 almost in the morning Central Time. We see one car moving down the street in Houston, Texas tonight. So a lot of people left Houston yesterday, as you saw, and they're getting whacked. They're not getting whacked like Anderson's getting whacked down in Beaumont, and the people in Lake Charles are going to get whacked by this thing. But it's not an altogether pleasant night. 50-mile-an-hour winds, peak winds are not pleasant. Jay Osborne is a business owner, a Texan. He's in it's Port O'Connor, Texas, isn't it, Mr. Osborne?
Yes.
And what's the weather like there? You're a little bit west-south of Galveston, sort of between Corpus Christi and Galveston, right?
Yes, sir.
What's it like?
It's blowing about 10, 15 mile an hour. It's not too bad.
10, 15 mile an hour sounds like a perfectly pleasant night. You almost want to go out and fly a kite or something compared to what other people are having. Is it raining hard?
No rain at all. We got pretty lucky, actually.
That's remarkable. What do you do for a living, sir?
We have a restaurant here in Port O'Connor, and I have some trucks, 18-wheelers.
Is the restaurant open?
No, we closed down a couple of days ago. We spent a couple of days getting ready and let the employees, they all took off, and we were evacuating, and we saw it looked like it was going to miss us, so we just hung around.
This time you guessed right.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Connor, thanks for joining us. We're happy for you that while other people are going to have a lot of cleaning up to do, it sounds like things at your end of the world are pretty good. Chad Myers in Atlanta, here's my question.
Yeah.
Port O'Connor isn't really that far from Galveston. I mean, it's not like 150 miles away or something, but the weather's altogether different.
Yeah, it's probably 120 miles away, though. Yeah.
It's that far? Okay.
It is, and obviously the winds have been coming offshore, and if the winds are coming from offshore, we talk about this too, about the bad side and the easy side, there's more friction on the land, obviously, more trees, more hills, more buildings, so you don't get as much wind if you have friction compared to this wind just ripping right off the water. And talk about ripping off the water. See that white dot right there? That's about Cameron or Calcasieu Pass. They just had a wind gust there measured by an automated station of 112 miles per hour. So that's one side of the storm to the other. 112, the highest gust so far. Aaron?
Just the length, I guess length is the right word, the length of the storm from west to east is roughly how long? Now, I was just playing with numbers about an hour ago, and I thought around 200 miles. So
at least. Yeah, that's probably the length of the hurricane force winds, or even the, let's say, 60 mile per hour winds from one side to another, at least 200 miles. I'm going to go ahead and switch my sources real quick and go back to that map that we had of Port O'Connor, because that was kind of a telling map to say that, look, this was already all the way to New Orleans, and this is almost all the way to Bryan, Texas. 375 miles we just measured. Our meteorologist Dave Hennon put that on there for me. Thank you, Dave. There's almost 400 miles. And earlier today, Aaron, just because as a side note, it was raining in places like Cape Coral, Fort Myers, and Tampa in one of those feeder bands that was still attached to this storm. So that's another 600 miles from here that this storm has spread out its arms, or its tentacles, if you will. There now you see that feeder band now is east of Panama City. It's just such a large storm all the way to Shreveport, and obviously well into the Gulf of Mexico where we can't see. There are probably showers in here, but the radars won't go that far. And
just again, the one other thing about this storm, once we get past tonight and we do the cleanup tomorrow, we do it. It's not like I'm going to be out there doing it, or for that matter you are. The fact is that there's a whole nother concern, which is days, literally days of rain.
Well, if you have if it's 400 miles across from one side to the other, and it sits here and it moves itself right to about Shreveport, Texarkana, and it stops, literally stops. There's almost a banana-shaped high pressure, and I don't want to think people to start thinking silly, but it's got a loop on the west side, a top, and then a loop on the east side, and that big, almost kidney bean, I guess, better description, kidney bean shaped high pressure won't allow it to go any farther. It won't allow it to go west because there's a high there too. Won't allow it to go east because there's a piece there too, and it's going to sit here and rain for 4 days. Now, there's not going to be 100 mile per hour winds for 4 days. The winds will be 20, 25. But if you have 25 inches of rain, does it really matter?
It doesn't matter that much. No. That's the truth. Thank you. Get back to you in a minute. Miles O'Brien's in Lumberton, Texas. Miles will anchor American Morning there in a few hours. In the meantime, you can see this is really the best wide shot we've had out of there in a while. It doesn't look very pleasant, buddy.
No, it's coming in. The rain is horizontal and in sheets. And what Chad was talking about this rain, I think that's going to be the real problem here. I've already standing in a pretty deep puddle. The flooding is really starting to happen here. You know, and part of the reason we came here, Aaron, was that this is, 30, 40 feet above sea level. We thought we'd be protected against the storm surge, but localized flooding as a result of this rain is another matter entirely. I've been using the wind gauge here. The sustained winds right now, about 40 miles an hour. Chad can double check me on that one. Gusts a little bit more. I don't know if you can see that flag behind me there. Since we last were on the air, Aaron, just a few minutes ago, it was intact, and now it is, Old Glory's a bit shredded here on Main Street in Lumberton. That lies ahead. This is really just a small taste of what is coming, and really just a fraction of the kinds of winds that we ultimately anticipate here. As we say, like a lot of places up and down the coast here, people heeded those evacuation warnings. We're told 90% of this town has moved up even to higher ground, but there still are stragglers, and there are stragglers in places like Port Arthur. And on this dark and windy and rainy night with that huge storm surge and this terrible storm, you have to think about them, Aaron.
We think about all people who, for whatever reason, either because of their work or because they're stubborn or because they can't get out, are stuck in all of this tonight, and they're about to get the worst of it. I mean, we're really on the edge of the worst of it, and we hope everybody makes it through. Your own situation there, you seem quite out in the open.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I'm standing in front of the City Hall and Police Department in Lumberton, and they've been kind enough to shelter us here. And they assured us that they felt that this was a good place to be. Out here on Main Street, though, that's a different story entirely. As you can see, going down Main Street there, that wind just whipping along there. Sheets and sheets of rain, and even as I speak, it just is picking up. You can really feel the power of that storm here. The good news is, although I just saw a car drive by, I don't know who that was. I think it might have been one of the police officers. I haven't seen much evidence of anybody out and about trying to see what this storm is all about. I think the lessons of Katrina are on people's minds here. You know, people here, a lot of people here remember Hurricane Carla back in 1961, but since then they really haven't had a direct hit here. But places like Sabine Pass, Port Arthur, Lake Charles, the direct hit is happening as we speak.
Pretty much. Just for people who aren't familiar, Lumberton's pretty much small town Texas. 10,000 or so people, give or take, right?
Yeah, great town. Perfect, quintessential Texas town. That's a good way of describing it. Very neighborly, but also a little bit of Texas stubbornness here. The people that have held out despite what you described a moment ago. Put your Social Security number on your arm in indelible ink, or put your license in your sock in case we have to recover your body. And they want to stick it out. That is certainly a typically Texan response, I would guess. But this is, we're 15 miles north of Beaumont, so we're a little bit higher, a little more inland than where Anderson is right now. And this is largely a bedroom community for Beaumont and the oil industry that exists there.
Just hang in there. We'll get stay safe there for a bit. Your workday is just quite literally just beginning. Miles and Soledad will be handling American Morning coming up in a few hours from now here on CNN. Ted Rollins is in New Orleans. The story of this day, or I guess a Friday, really began in New Orleans with a lot of rain and a levee break. You look like it's a breezy night in New Orleans, not at all bad, which is good news for the Army Corps because they can go in and deal with the levees tomorrow.
Yeah, very good news for us. Tonight, there hasn't been much rain for the last few hours, but the winds are kicking up a bit. It started very poorly today in New Orleans. A lot of people very nervous because at 10 o'clock this morning, much earlier than expected, there was a breach in a levee that protected the 9th Ward, and the 9th Ward is completely flooded tonight because of that breach. All eyes are now on the rest of the levee system, and engineers are keeping their fingers crossed that Lake Pontchartrain can be held at bay. A storm surge is expected later or throughout the evening. They're watching that very closely. At this point, though, I just talked to a policeman. He says there's no reason to be concerned at this point, and so far so good here in New Orleans. And this, like I say, is a city that could use a little bit of good news, especially after the way this day started with another levee breach.
Ted, was it just that, I say just advisedly, just that one part of the city that was flooded today, just the 9th Ward?
Well, water also went all the way out to St. Bernard Parish, but this is an area that was completely devastated after Katrina. So in comparison to what has happened, what damage was done, probably none when you consider that the entire area was already pretty much wiped out. This is on the eastern side. The western side, which encompasses downtown, and the rest of the city of New Orleans is relatively dry. There has been some spillage with some surge, but for the most part, the levees have held, and they are watching them very closely, keeping their fingers crossed that will be the case throughout the night tonight.
Very few people would have any reason to go back to the 9th Ward, to be perfectly honest. I mean, if you remember the pictures of New Orleans, it's one of the areas that was the most devastated in the days after Katrina. In other parts of the city, do you see activity tonight?
Most of the city is vacant. There's a lot of military personnel, a lot of law enforcement folks from around the country that have been working the search and rescue and helping to rebuild the city. And of course, a lot of media still hanging around here. But for the most part, the city has been cleared out. There was mandatory evacuations, of course, in place. Some people got out and are hunkered down in their homes. There's not a lot of activity out in the streets, though. We're in the French Quarter here, and we're just seeing a lot of military folks milling about, but that's about it.
Ted, thank you very much. Ted Rowlands in the Big Easy tonight, where tomorrow or later today, in fact, the Army Corps of Engineers will try and repair as best they can the levees that were breached today. We talked what now seems like quite a while ago to Chad Myers joins us, to someone with the Army, a brigadier general with the Army Corps, and he thought they'd be able to make those repairs if the weather cooperated, and it sounds like the weather probably will cooperate.
At least there won't be more rain on top of what they had. The real levee problem, Aaron, was that the wind was blowing from the east-southeast for hours, literally 24 to 36 hours. And it's just like, this is the reason why we have El Nino. If the wind blows from one direction in the Pacific Ocean for a long time, that warm water piles up on the western coast of South America and Central America. Well, the wind was piling the water up into Lake Bourne, which is that lake right there, that one right there, and then it was moving into Lake Pontchartrain. It was filling all of the levees, filling all of this low bayou area that was being protected by these levees, and obviously a couple of them failed. They were obviously built for maybe 4 or 5 foot storm surge protection, and the storm surge that we know of was 6 to 7 feet as that water kept coming in. Now this is a different type of storm surge, still part of the storm, but this is was like acting like a catcher's mitt. If you just think all this water coming in, it was just catching it, and then obviously those levees didn't hold. Back out to the west of there, though, we've had some severe weather all the way up to Baton Rouge with the tornado warning that just expired about 4 minutes ago. It has not been extended. So I assume that the storm, as it moved on by, which is probably that one right there, it actually did not produce a tornado, or they would have extended that tornado warning. But obviously there is still more weather in Louisiana that we're not focusing on because it's the eye, and the eye itself is still way back out to the east and the west of here, rather, from Port Arthur. Now this is the Louisiana radar. Now we just popped on. Thank you very much, Dave. This will be the Houston radar, I believe, and the eye wall itself now coming on shore, probably another 45 minutes to an hour. The Hurricane Center will be able to call landfall somewhere right here in Louisiana. You don't get landfall when the eye wall comes on shore. You get landfall when the center of the eye comes on shore, and that's probably going to be Cameron, Louisiana, or someplace pretty close.
We're actually on the right side of the screen. We see that other computer-generated picture of the hurricane, and the eye there still seems to be clearly formed, kind of tightly formed. But looking at the radar map, we don't see it at all. Is that just the difference in the two maps?
You're talking about the satellite picture itself sometimes?
I guess so, yeah. I guess that's what's in the lower right.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, but you will notice that even on that satellite picture, that where is it? Right there. That the bottom part of the eye is not as deep. It's not as dark, and so therefore you're not seeing the convection wrapping around it. Typically, what happens when a storm gets close to land, Aaron, is that it'll just gobble up a little bit of dry air. That dry air comes off the hill country. It came off Corpus Christi, and it came in and it was gobbled up into the storm. And there you see right here. See how there's not as much purple in there, so there's no convection really going on in there. The hardest part of the storm right now is on the purple side, and that's where it's raining. And I'll switch the maps, and that's where it's raining. Absolutely makes perfect sense.
It does to me.
Well, to me.
It does. By now it does to me too, and that's the wonderful thing about it. Thank you, Chad. Sean Caleb's over in Galveston, Texas tonight, and kind of been a long night, but you're hanging in there.
Yeah, and I guess a hint of good news, I'd say within the last 10 minutes, I saw two large fire engines go down the street back toward the convention center, so we're trying to find out, but presumably those last embers in that one fire, we should probably revisit that a bit because it's been a few hours since we talked about it in any detail, but hopefully that is all under control now, because it's just simply been pouring here now for the last hour, so you can probably see it through the lights pretty well, coming down pretty vertical fashion right now, but periodically the winds come in and it blows across up pretty well. But really, I think tomorrow when we have a chance to take a look at this, as we're going to do with so much of this story, and talk with the fire chief, there's probably going to be a real story of heroes that are coming out of this. The fact that they were able to get to that area, were able to at least control the fires that destroyed that one building and severely damaged the others, and keep those embers from spreading, because the fire chief who we spoke with said that embers were starting small fires on some of those other buildings, some of those other homes in that area, and this is an area considered quite trendy, and so they were able to knock that down pretty quick. But as this rain just continues to linger and linger and linger, you have to wonder also not so much about the Gulf of Mexico, the seawall doing its job, but boy, over on the bay side, people are already talking about some floodwaters coming up in the streets, and if Chad's right and it's just going to pour for the next 3 days, there's just nowhere for this water to go on this barrier island. There's nowhere for it to run off. It's going to get pretty bad.
And just again, this were a couple of old homes that went up, and a commercial building, if I remember correctly.
Exactly, two what are being termed historic homes went up, burned, at least one of those destroyed, and then one business. And it was also right in the shadow of a very large, I believe it was a Bank South building. They said close to 25 floors. So while it went up and basically turned that whole block bright orange when the storm was really coming into this area, almost surreal. We asked a firefighter, how do you battle something like this in the middle of a hurricane with no power, limbs down, power lines down? It just boggles the mind. Also, we asked him about any kind of cause at this point, and that basically what they told us, at this point they have no idea. They just wanted to keep it from spreading. They'll go in and do the forensic work on that sometime in the future.
Sean, I think the answer, how do you fight a fire in weather like this, is very carefully. Thank you. We'll get back to you in a moment. Randy Kay is in Baytown, Texas. Baytown is important in understanding the story, in part because it is home to a large part of the refinery business and chemical plants as well, right?
That is correct, Aaron. Baytown sits right on the Houston Ship Channel, which is this 50-mile stretch of waterway that goes from the Gulf of Mexico to the port of Houston. And that waterway, it's lined with about 200 or so chemical plants and refineries, which is critical to bringing the oil in into our country, and also not only that, but also refining the oil so they can ship it back out through the pipeline. So people were very worried about these plants and refineries during Rita. In fact, we visited the Shell plant just yesterday in Deer Park, Texas, a little ways from here, and they were shutting down completely. They have about 1,700 employees there, and they were only leaving about 20 behind, and that would include security and some environmental experts, just in case there was a problem. Also, in case there's any kind of chemical leak, there's a group here called the Channel Industries Mutual Aid, and they would respond immediately if there was any type of vapor cloud released from one of these plants. It only takes them about 24 hours to shut down, but it takes them about a week to get things going again, and we're not sure how bad the damage might be there. They're going to assess that as soon as Rita passes through. But Aaron, when I spoke with you last, you said something about how it wasn't raining very much. Well, I think Rita must have heard you, because it's as if she just turned on the faucet. It is coming down pretty good here at this moment, and so is the wind. Not just the rain, but the wind. I've showed you earlier tonight, or this morning, whatever you want to call it, there were 3 flags up on those flagpoles. First, we saw the Comfort Inn where we're staying. Their flag was on the left pole. It's gone now. The middle pole, the American flag was flying there, and just moments ago, before we came on the air with you, that flag flew into the wind and disappeared. All that's left now, you can see that's the Texas flag that has wrapped itself around that flagpole. Those flagpoles were told by the hotel owners they're about 10 feet deep into the ground, so we're not getting too concerned that they're going to fly away, but they could snap. We're also a little worried about this pool area over here. These palm trees haven't gone yet. They've only been in there since January. We're not sure what's going to happen there. There's a dumpster in the distance that the winds are strong enough to move, and the pool equipment, though, luckily has been taken out of that area. I did speak with the fire marshal here in town. He said they're only experiencing right now a lot of downed power lines, but certainly not any fires, just a lot of power out. But again, things have really changed here since this area experienced a massive hurricane back in '61. There are a lot more people here, a lot more subdivisions, but apparently they have evacuated most of them. Aaron?
Randy, thank you. There's a good story there that you were telling me earlier. We'll come back and hear it at some point about the plant manager and his son just back from Iraq. But Bob Dunn is with us. Mr. Dunn is the mayor of Nacogdoches, which we'll cite on the map in a second so you get some sense of where that is in the scheme of things. There you go. What's it like there right now, sir?
Well, things are not too bad right here. We're just getting a few showers and a few gusts of wind from some of the outer bands, and it probably will be later on today before we get any real rain and the winds pick up.
When, before we get to the rain, were people evacuated from the city?
Oh, yes. No people evacuated from this city. We had
You're taking
evacuees come into the city.
Yeah, and how are you housing them? Are there shelters open in the city?
That's correct. We have about 3,000 in shelters. All the hotels and motels are full. Many people are in private homes, and parking lots are actually full. Just about any space where vehicles could stop and park. People, some been on the road 18 and 20 hours just getting here, and by the time they arrived here, they are just exhausted, so they just don't want to go any further, so they pull into a parking lot or something of that nature and just start sleeping in their vehicles.
Just a couple things. How big a city is it normally? What's the normal population?
We're about 30,000.
Chad Myers, our meteorologist, is with us, too. He's got a question he wants to whip your way.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sure you know that you are in the bullseye of what could be a 12 to 24-inch rain band for the next 4 days. What are your plans to alleviate the problems that might exist?
Well, we have already put our maps up that show the 50 and 100-year flood limits, so we are already prepared to evacuate in case it's necessary.
Are you anticipating that that's likely to happen?
We anticipate just about everything possible, but we have been in the midst of a very long dry spell here, so it will take a good bit of rain to saturate the ground before we get any runoff. And even though we have 2 creeks running through town, the Lanana and Bonita, both of those creeks are subject to flooding. The Lanana Creek flooded in the past. A lot of improvements have been made on it, so it's not as subject to flooding as the Bonita. The Bonita is subject to flash flooding, so we are keeping our eyes out. We have people that will be on the lookout at all times. So we try to anticipate any problems that might exist, so that we can take care of them and take care of our people.
We lost it tonight. Aaron can't hear us. Can you talk to Aaron to make sure it's okay?
Yes.
He can't hear the phone.
Okay, I briefly, this may have been my earpiece here, but I briefly lost the mayor. Do we still have the mayor, or we don't? Okay, that was Bob Dunn, who's the mayor of Nacogdoches, and weather's not terrible there. They have taken in evacuees, but as Chad pointed out, they are right in the center of what will be the final phase of Rita, which is likely to be days and days of rain. We can go back to Beaumont. We haven't seen or heard from Anderson in a while, and I don't know if that was you guys relocated or we just lose you.
To be honest, I just needed a break. It's pretty miserable out here, so we just sat in a vehicle for about 15 minutes and tried to regroup. We've got water and all the equipment, so we're trying to maintain it for as long as we can. Yeah, as you can tell, the weather's, I mean, it's just miserable out here. It just continues to be sort of non-stop, this pouring rain, just, you know, every minute after minute after minute, without any let-up. It is pretty steady, pretty constant. The winds seem to have maintained the same speed over the last half hour or so, I would say. There have been some gusts, some pickups. I've been sitting in the car for a little bit just to try to get dry, or at least get a little bit warm, because it's actually quite cold out here. And when you're standing around wet for so long, it gets even colder. And sitting in the car, I mean, the vehicle is shaking back and forth. But it's very hard to get a sense because of what is happening all around, because now the lights are completely off here in Beaumont. The only lights that we have are the two lights that we have running off our own generator. But there had been street lights, even the light at the local, I think it's the library or a library. Those lights are completely off. Even it seemed like emergency lighting. Some of these buildings had their own emergency generators. Those seem to be gone as well. There was an enormous explosion in the sky, lighting up a transformer, exploding, and didn't hear it at all, but really just illuminated this greenish glow for a good length of time. It was very, very eerie. But Aaron, I mean, we've been talking about, and Chad was talking about it earlier, when there are no lights, it really is disturbing, because you can't see more than 20 feet in any direction. And so we've sort of barricaded ourselves in this. We're on a street, but we have these cars in front of us, so that the wind is being blocked a little bit by these cars. The idea being any debris that is flying toward us, it would hit the cars before it got to us. That's the theory, at least, and let's hope that works. But it is just constant here. It is nonstop. And the worst, I guess, from what I've heard from Chad, is not over. We have another 2 or 3 hours of this sort of grinding weather. I'd be interested to hear at some point if it gets much worse, or if it just sort of maintains at this speed, maintains in these conditions for quite some time, Aaron.
Yeah, Anderson, we described this a few minutes ago as we're sort of at the end of the beginning. We're in the beginning stages of the middle, and the middle is going to be pretty uncomfortable. Chad, is Chad still there? Okay. Anderson will get an answer on the how long question. You can expect to be really miserable in a minute. Sean Caleb's is in Galveston, Texas. Sean?
Well, basically, the situation here hasn't changed a whole lot in the last hour or so. I mean, the rain is just coming down very solid fashion. The kind of winds we're seeing right now, nothing terribly serious, just the kind that have been gusting. We are on, if there is such a thing, the good side of this hurricane. We know that the crews that have been out there firefighting are all back. Right now, we're trying to check in and see what kind of flooding we're having on the bay side right now. Of course, leading up while Rita was churning in the Gulf of Mexico, the real fear here was the punishing storm surge. It's really hard to talk about Galveston, Aaron, and not talk about what happened back in 1900, the hurricane that killed at least 6,000 people. So many people who live on this island are people who've lived here for generations, or they've heard the stories growing up. We spent some time with a police officer, and there's a statue here, a memorial to all of those who died. And basically, when they're going through their training, they start their day right at that statue. They do their sit-ups, they do their push-ups there. They talk about it, how serious it is to educate people on the dangers of a hurricane. Even if Katrina hadn't happened, I think the people here in Galveston on this barrier island would have taken any kind of threat from Rita extremely seriously. I don't think it would have been that hard to scare, or to encourage, I shouldn't say scare, to encourage so many people to get off this island. Aaron?
That hurricane is the stuff in the way that the Great San Francisco earthquake is, and other catastrophes that have occurred around the country over the years, is the stuff of local legend. It is literally things. I was reading about this the other day. You learn about it when you're a little kid and you first go off to the first grade. It is part and parcel of the history of Galveston, Texas, as much as anything else is part of the history of that city.
Yeah, exactly, and I think I saw a story Anderson did on it earlier this week, and really the only images, of course, are still pictures that come from that, and they're very frightening. I mean, if you just look at that. And we spoke with the mayor the other day, Rita Ann Thomas, who's just a very interesting, neat lady in her own right, but her family goes back to that time. Her family lived through that hurricane, and she talks about all the changes that really were enacted here on that island after that hurricane. They basically dredged part of the bay. They put sand up in the middle of town. They elevated the city something like 10 to 12 feet. It's gone down a little bit, and even they had old historic homes that are still around here today, and they got those and put them on wheels, and in essence put them up on a giant jack and raised those buildings up several feet so they would last. She says that the people talk about in the old days, they could stand in the middle of town and look straight down and see the beach. Well, you can't do that anymore. You look down and the horizon goes away. So they certainly did everything that technology can allow them to do in the last century to make sure the same kind of punishment doesn't happen to this area. You can argue all day long about how effective a seawall is, but certainly it gives the people here in Galveston some solace knowing they have 17 feet of concrete protecting them from the Gulf of Mexico.
I was going to say, better than nothing. Thank you. Gary Tuckman is in Beaumont. I hope they, Gary, aren't writing local legends tonight in Beaumont that Rita doesn't go down in the way that unnamed storm in Galveston went down so long ago.
Well, Aaron, I hope not. 1900, 105 years ago, and people still talk about it in the state of Texas, how bad that hurricane was, that their great-great-grandparents or their great-grandparents told them those stories. This will not be as bad, but I can tell you that Beaumont, Texas, where we are right now, is getting hit very badly. The conditions now are as bad as they've been the whole time. Last time we talked to you, Aaron, we were commenting it was 1:10 Central Time, and we marveled at the fact that the power was still on. And lo and behold, as soon as we said goodbye to you, the power went off, and it's been off ever since. The city is dark. You can see some lights behind me. That's a generator in an office building behind me. But right now, this is the scary time of a hurricane. And a hurricane, the brunt of it hits at night. You just don't see what's flying around. You hear wonderfully. Your senses are enhanced when it comes to hearing. And we hear things flying to our left. We hear things flying to our right. We don't know exactly what's flying. You keep a careful eye on to make sure that nothing is flying towards you. And I always think when a hurricane hits at night, the children who may still be here in Beaumont, children who are in shelters miles away and are hearing these sounds and wondering what's going on. And you know that it will just produce nightmares for months to come for these children. And you hope there's someone around to comfort them. For us, we're not alone. We're talking to you, and we're talking to millions of our viewers, and we feel like we have a lot of company. You don't have that feeling. But we do feel for the elderly people and the children who are going through this right now. Beaumont, Texas, when the sun comes up, will not look like Beaumont, Texas when the sun was last up. There's a lot of damage here. The flooding is already starting. That's from the rainfall. The rain has been coming up for 11 hours without stopping. Very unusual amount of rain. Most hurricanes, including even Katrina, while the winds were heavier during Katrina, it wasn't raining this hard for so long before the brunt of the storm came. So I'm very concerned with what the rainfall will do. Not even talking about the storm surge, but what the rainfall will do when it comes to the end of all this. Aaron?
We'll try and get some answers on that. The wonderful thing, Gary, about children is that they are incredibly resilient, and they deal with all manner of stuff and bounce back much faster than those of us who are middle-aged and beyond can do. Thank you very much. Chad Anderson was asking earlier how long he could, and they could, and all the people in Beaumont could expect I guess the worst of it is the simple way to put it.
Well, the eye wall, the northern eye wall, Aaron, is actually on shore. The center part of the eye itself, in fact, is not. It is not quite there yet. The Hurricane Center will make a landfall call probably somewhere around Cameron. Now I'm going to zoom in. Aaron, Anderson, I see you standing there in the rain, and I'm going to kind of zoom into street level here. We're seeing the rain coming in still from the north. You still don't have the worst of it yet, Anderson. You're still an hour and a half from the end of the worst of it, and then it gets better from there. But you are still in the teeth of this storm as the eye wall, the western eye wall, passes over Port Arthur probably in the next 20 minutes and over you in the next hour to hour and 20 minutes, where the center of the eye, right down here, we'll go ahead and keep it moving forward. The center of the eye not quite on land, but it'll be very close to Cameron, Louisiana, when it comes on shore here, probably in about 45 minutes or so.
Will, is Anderson able to hear us?
Yeah, Aaron, I hear. I can tell you, it helps to know. I mean, one of the worst things about standing here, and I was listening to Gary talk about, you don't feel so alone, but there is this loneliness in the dark. I mean, we do have people around us, the crew, thank goodness, and a connection to the outside world. But there are so many people who, it is pitch black, and beyond our camera lights, you just cannot see anything. And it is so, and every now and then there is a sound, it's cliche to say it's like a freight train. It's also at times like a person screaming, and you hear it just out there in the dark, and it is very eerie. You don't know exactly where it's coming from. You don't know exactly what's causing it. But it is a very strange feeling. You feel very much on the edge of the world, and so it helps to hear someone like Chad say, it's an hour and a half left of the worst. The worst.
I think we froze up.
Yeah, Chad. An hour and a half of the worst, and then. Right. It doesn't go, bingo, it's good again, right?
No, it doesn't. But remember, we talked about this at length, Aaron, that there's really only a top half of the eye. We're not really going to have a secondary slam of the bottom half of the eye because we lost it with some dry air that pulled into the storm, and that's where the dry air is right now, right in the bottom half of the eye. So a lot of times, if you really do get run over by the eye, your winds will be coming in from the east. They will stop. That gets eerie, and then the wind comes the other direction, coming in from the west. We're not going to have a huge westerly component after the storm goes by Beaumont. In fact, the winds are going to die off rather quickly, although the wind gust in Beaumont was just 81 miles per hour. New 2 o'clock update, a few minutes early, 2 o'clock Central Time. If you're keeping track, 29.6, 93.7, Aaron, and it's about 10 miles south-southeast of Sabine Pass. That means that the storm is going to make landfall within the next hour because it's making the northwestern progress at 12 miles per hour. Landfall is expected in the next hour or so here. Have maximum sustained winds reported from Dave. Thank you very much. Still 120 miles per hour. Searim State Park reported a wind gust to 101, and we know Calcasieu Pass reported a wind gust to 112. That's in this most dangerous part of the eye wall right there. Aaron?
Chad, it's been a treat, pleasure working with you for what's been a long time tonight.
Thank you.
You've been marvelously helpful. Anderson, take care of yourself out there for the next 90 minutes or a couple of hours. CNN's coverage continues around the clock, 24 hours a day. Pretty much will stay that way throughout the weekend. The next segment, Tony Harris and Catherine Calloway in Atlanta.
Over the last couple of minutes, and it looks like you're just taking a real pounding there.
Yeah, horizontal rain here, Tony. It's ever since we got going here just about an hour or so ago, it has not stopped. It is steady. You know, we're about 40, 50 feet above sea level here. That's part of the reason why we're here. We wanted to be protected from the storm surge. But this rain is creating a serious flooding problem already. I can see this drainage ditch has been filling up very rapidly. Look behind me, Old Glory there. Just in the last hour, the flag was reduced to tatters. We expect that flagpole might have a hard time. My wind gauge is telling me pretty much sustained winds at my level at about 30 knots. That's in excess, getting close to 40 miles an hour, 35, 40 miles an hour. Take a look at this sign here. We're at the Lumberton City Hall and Police Station. If you look up there, it says Homecoming Parade, September 24th, 9 a.m. No homecoming parade today, that's for sure, in Lumberton. This is a town of about 8,700 people. We're 15 miles north of Beaumont, and they have been pretty pleased with the way people have evacuated. 90% of this town is not here. They got some higher ground. Boy, it's really getting better now. It's hard to even imagine the leading edge of this. We are probably about 90 miles from the leading edge of that eye wall you've just been talking about. It is blowing up a storm. I mean, the power of this. Well, the point I wanted to make is 90% of the people evacuated. The authorities were very pleased about that. They had a staged evacuation. But you have to remember, this is a county. These two counties here, Hart and Jefferson, have about 200,000 people in them. So doing the quick math, that means 20,000 people are in their home now. And when you get down towards Port Arthur, which is right at sea level, and you consider the prospect of that storm surge, well, as the police chief told me here, as they were leaving Port Arthur, they said, if you're going to stay, put your license in your sock so we can identify your body. I fear for those people tonight, Tony.
Boy, Miles, I tell you what, we see, this is an amazing shot here, because what we see are the sustained winds, and then we see those very powerful gusts, and the gusts look like they're about to knock you off your feet.
Yeah, they're getting up there in the 40s now, 40 knots. So we're really getting it now. Yeah, 36. These are kind of averaged out, 36, 40 knots. But that's just, that's nothing compared to what lies ahead. We know we got 120 mile an hour winds coming our way. I got to tell you, until you've endured these kinds of winds, when you start thinking about 120, it's pretty hard to imagine.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, Miles, thank you.
Anderson Cooper has got a little bit of break from this, because it looks like, Anderson, you've moved now to
taking some cover.
Yeah, gotten a little bit of cover. The winds must have picked up the last few minutes.
Oh my.
The winds have significantly picked up just in the last 10 minutes, even just while listening to Miles talk. We're underneath a building. We have these columns around us that we are sort of hiding behind, basically, when we're not broadcasting. Also, we have some vehicles which we have parked to block any debris that might be heading toward us. What is so creepy right now is that the electricity has now gone out in Beaumont. For most of this evening, we had street lights, if you can believe it. The electricity went out probably about half an hour ago. It has not come back on. And you can see, maybe with the lights that we have, you can see a distance of maybe 20 feet. But beyond that, it is just complete darkness all around. And every now and then, there is a sound, it's a cliche to call it a freight train sound. At moments it does sound like that. It also sounds like a woman howling, or a person howling, and hearing that out of the darkness, you don't know what direction it's coming from. You don't know exactly what is causing it. It is certainly just the wind whipping around in sort of these natural wind tunnels. But it is as bad as it is now, and it is certainly bad, and this is without a doubt the worst we have seen from this location in Beaumont, Texas. It is, according to Chad Myers, only going to get worse over the next hour, hour and a half. We here have not seen the worst of this storm. We're holding on to the idea that we have about an hour and a half left to reach the worst part of it, and then it will progressively get better. But as Chad has been reporting all night long, there are still going to be rains. This system is just going to stall over the state of Florida. So for the next 4 days or so, there is just going to be relentless rains of varying strengths. We are very close to the Neches River in Beaumont. we're probably about 200 or 300 yards from it. We were down by the river's edge earlier when we started broadcasting, probably about 7 hours ago. And so we have not, we can't even see the water anymore, and we can't get down there because there's too much debris and there's too many trees that might be flying around. It's just not safe. But we were curious to see how much of the water has actually come up over the banks and sort of flooded that park. We're not sure how much flooding there has been. Certainly in the streets here in Beaumont, there is a significant amount of water just in the gutters, probably several inches, maybe even a foot in places here or there. But it is really picking up. I mean, minute by minute here, it is just getting worse and worse, as you can probably see. And it's sort of this swirl depending on, I mean, the wind is coming from the north still, but it occasionally seems to be coming from the east when it hits the buildings from a certain way, Catherine.
Okay, Anderson, just if you could, we'd like to keep your shot up and bring Chad Myers in. And Chad, help us understand. And look, Beaumont is a few miles inland here. He is not exactly on the coast here. Explain to us what we're seeing behind Anderson here and the strong winds and tell us about what we're seeing there.
He is actually on the easy side of the storm, if you can believe that.
That really is hard to believe.
A Category 3, there may be nothing easy about it.
He's laughing at this point, Chad, that you said the easy part of the storm.
I realize that, but we've lost our shots from Lake Charles altogether because of the winds that are here and how they have moved on shore here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here for you so that as we take a look at where the heaviest winds are, we're talking about Orange, talking about Port Arthur, right through Cameron, into Lake Charles, this very heavy band. This is the northernmost eye wall. Hurricane Center has not called yet landfall because it has to be the center of the eye to come on shore. That's still a few miles offshore. But here you go, Lake Charles, very heavy rain, very heavy wind with the storms. A lot of the wind coming in from the east now. Lake Charles gusting to almost 90 miles per hour. Just had a wind gust where Anderson is here, Beaumont. That is 77 miles per hour, about 55 miles per hour sustained. And he's not even to the closest approach to the eye wall yet. That's still going to be about 45 minutes to an hour for that eye wall to get as close as it's going to get to Beaumont. Port Arthur, you have about 20 minutes, and your weather is going to be as bad as it's going to be for the rest of the storm. So if you're not in Port Arthur.
Can I ask Chad a question?
Go right ahead, Anderson.
Hey, yeah, Chad, I'm sorry, I didn't realize my mic was still on. You said right now we've seen some wind gusts, I think you said in the 70-mile-an-hour range, sustained winds in the 50. Earlier, you had talked about the possibility of sustained winds, 80 miles an hour, wind gusts here at 100. Do you think that is still the case here? I mean, because if that is true, what we have seen is nothing compared to what we may see in the next hour or so.
Well, that is absolutely true. The closer you get into this eye wall, which Port Arthur will get the eye wall, no question. So will Orange, so will Hackberry, areas like that are just off to the east, into Calcasieu Parish, into Cameron Parish here in Louisiana. You are on the north side, so we're subtracting the forward speed from the total wind, which is still 120. So, Anderson, my numbers still hold up. You're going to have sustained to 80, and you're going to have gusts to 100. No question about it.
Wow, that is amazing. I honestly don't know if we will be able to stay on the air for that because we're sort of clinging on at this point and to our location. And the fact that the lights have gone out adds this whole other layer because the visibility is really cut down significantly. And I can only imagine what it is like for people who are in their homes right now without the electricity, just listening to this storm out there. I mean, I am thankful that I'm able to hear what you're saying because it sort of gives you something to hold on to. The notion of just, there's such a lack of information and suddenly your world is boiled down to, what you can only see and what you can feel around you. And it is an extraordinarily creepy sensation. And I keep thinking about the people in Galveston back in 1900 who were, just out there, thought the day was going to be a regular day, and then all of a sudden that storm of the century came, killing more than 8,000 people.
Absolutely.
Chad.
And, at least now we know the storms are coming. Go ahead. I heard you. Go ahead, Catherine.
I just want to make sure we bring Miles in this, and he's in Lumberton. If you can show us what's going on there in Lumberton right now.
That's
a little
up
north.
Under the G right there, under peak gust. And the winds for Miles actually won't get to their worst, won't get to the peak for about another 2 hours. Lumberton, right? Well, it was. Right there. Right there.
Hey,
Go ahead,
Chad,
Miles.
What sort of wind are you getting right there for Lumberton right now? Because I'm trying to calibrate my wind gauge here. What do you get?
We had sustained winds to 56 for you and a wind gust to about 65 for you. This is the actual true viewer right here, picking up a wind speed, a total wind speed at 45 miles per hour.
So where I am down on the ground, of course, the anemometers are up high, right?
A little bit higher, but not above 10 feet.
Okay, I'm getting about average about 37 knots here. So I guess that jives pretty well with what you've got.
Pretty close. Plus you'd have some friction. You're not in an open field. If you were near a lake or an open field, you wouldn't have the friction from the buildings or from the live truck or from the trees around you.
Chad, you got to tell me how much rain this place has been getting. This has been a steady sheet. Oh my goodness, steady sheet of rain here.
Yeah.
Really, did they anticipate this much rain?
We absolutely did. Some areas, when this storm stops, this is going to be a 24-inch rainmaker, Miles. Not so much for you, but as the storm moves up toward Nacogdoches, up toward Shreveport, areas there could pick up 2 solid feet of rain, and that all has to run off, and obviously some of it's going to come up and flood.
24 inches. Now,
yes.
We came here, Chad, because we're at about 40 or 50 feet of elevation. Because we thought we'd avoid the flooding, but with 24 inches, no one's going to avoid flooding. That's a tremendous amount of rain. By the way, we've got our first tree casualty here. Yeah. Just a little, looks like a little oak tree there. But I imagine there'll be localized flooding way inland, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely, especially when you get up into the areas along the Sabine River, which is this river that comes right through here. When you get all of that water trying to get into one place to get down into the Gulf of Mexico, all of the water that falls out of this storm all has to get back to the Gulf of Mexico. No water is going to go anywhere else except back into the Gulf. So there are going to be rivers that turn into raging torrents here in the next 24 to 48 hours. And if you're near anywhere that's near a creek, stream, or any kind of a dry arroyo, which is a wash basically in Texas, a dry wash, you just need to be up and out of that area because, well, you can see just some of the rainfall rates in that red right there has to be 3 to 4 inches per hour, and it's been raining for 3 hours.
And Chad, if I could, and Miles, I want to go back to Anderson, if you can hear me, Anderson. I saw you taking a look behind you, and we've been watching that picture behind you. We almost didn't want you to turn around and take a look at it. It is such a frightening picture behind you. What exactly do you see back there?
Yeah, that is a good question. I'm just noticing for the first time in a while a few street lights very far in the distance. You probably can't even read them on the camera, and that's actually kind of comforting because you get a sense at least, okay, the street is still there, the street is down that way, and I'm watching very closely. Dave, I don't think you can actually show it. I don't know if it'll show up. The street light, the lamppost, is moving around pretty good, and I'm kind of keeping an eye on that to see if that thing gets ripped off, because the lights themselves are certainly moving, but the entire lamppost is shifting pretty rapidly. And it's sort of eerie. Just you can also see just on the ground there is littered, of course, just lots of tree branches, lots of leaves, and that is what we are continually kind of being hit by just out of the darkness. These little leaves coming up, these branches coming up. I'm just going to bend down and just grab one right here. Things like this, they just sort of come out of the darkness. And so again, I said, we parked some vehicles just in front of us, which blocks anything that may be flying. But every now and then you see just a little piece of leaf coming by. But I'm amazed that we're not seeing, some of the glass breaking. There are some buildings here with some pretty significant windows, 30, 40 feet panes of glass. There's a library just across the street. We're near the Civic Center here in Beaumont, Texas. But the sound, I don't think you can pick it up in the mics, but it is, I don't know. I don't want to say I wish you were here, because I don't wish anyone was here, but just the sound coming out of the darkness, it is a very scary sound, especially when you can't see what it is. It is something you sort of have to experience to really understand what it is like. And made all the worse, of course, for people who are in their homes right now, only hearing it, not able to get any kind of visual reference points around them.
Well, Anderson, stay with us as long as you can. We're going to bring in Max Mayfield now, the National Hurricane Center. I know he's going to want to talk with you and with Miles O'Brien. Mr. Mayfield, what can you tell us? Any new information you have for us?
Well, Anderson has got some more weather to come here. The northern eye wall, the innermost eye wall, is still not quite there to Beaumont yet. Anderson's right here, and you can see that red just about there. And we're still going to have that storm surge continuing to push in. As the winds become more southerly on the east side of that eye, that's when that water is really going to push in around the Cameron, Louisiana area, up to Calcasieu Lake and on up into the Lake Charles area, and then even over westward towards Sabine Lake.
We have Miles O'Brien, who's in Lumberton. He's a little bit away from what Anderson is getting now. Gentlemen, do you have anything you want to ask Mr. Mayfield?
Yeah, Max, I'll tell you, I'm very curious what you are seeing right now, or what you're able to project on the storm surge. We were told by a lot of the authorities from Port Arthur that there perhaps hundreds, maybe 1,000 or so people were left in Port Arthur. And I just keep thinking about them as this storm barrels in. Is the surge what was predicted there?
Well, we don't know yet. I haven't heard anything out of Port Arthur, but what I can tell you, Miles, is that the storm surge is really going to be bad near and to the east of the center, and it looks like the center may come on shore there, very near the Texas-Louisiana border, in which case, it would really be primarily to the east there, but it's awfully close. And what I think is going to happen here, I don't know if you can see this, but this is Sabine Lake, this is Calcasieu Lake, and all that land in between there is very, very low, and it's almost like a marsh, and I think the water will likely overtop that, and that should push some of that water into Sabine Lake and into the Port Arthur area.
Yeah, that is very low land, and it's marshy, and it's populated by a lot of refineries, and like I've been saying, that everybody was very pleased with the evacuation here, but this is not a storm that really anybody should be a part of. So what you're telling me, Max, is essentially we're on, relatively speaking, the easier side of the eye where I am in Lumberton.
And the strongest part is going to be, near into the east, and that's really going to be very near the, Sabine Pass area and eastward. But you're certainly going to have, even moving into that eye wall is going to spread in and over Beaumont and Lake Charles and everything in between.
Max, is Chad Myers up in the weather office. Everyone that I talked to today cannot believe how wet this storm is, how much rain is coming down. I'm looking at behind me some of the numbers around Lake Charles, radar estimates of over 8 inches. What do you have about that?
Well, we've been saying 10 to 15 inches here, and that's in the next day or so. Yep. We're even more concerned here in the 3 to 4 day time period if the stirring currents collapse as we're forecasting. Then it could just sit there, and we could have some rainfall amounts up to 25 inches. And we need to remember that we always have loss of life, well after the landfall, mostly from that inland freshwater flooding. So people need to be very mindful of that.
Max, thank you very much for your work this week and all the way through this season. It's been a long one for you, I know.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Chad, while we have you up, something that Max just mentioned, let me have you follow up on. The innermost portion of the eye wall is still to come ashore.
That's correct. Here's the eye wall itself. We don't quite have landfall yet. The strongest winds are definitely on shore, especially over on the eastern side around Cameron, around Calcasieu Pass, had wind gusts over 120 miles per hour there. Here are the strongest winds. Here's the eye. As the center of the eye comes on shore, the Hurricane Center will call landfall. It just hasn't happened yet. It just depends where you are, whether the winds are at their worst or not. Back down here to Holly Beach, basically the storm is essentially over for you. You'll get a little bit more on the other side of the eye wall, but really not much at all compared to what on this side of the eye. We can see how red this is compared to just a couple of light rain showers on the south side.
All right, well, we're going to go now to Baytown, Texas. Randy Kay is going to join us now and give us a situation there. Randy?
Hi, good morning. We are here in Baytown, which is about 45 miles or so east of, west of Beaumont. So we're actually on the weaker side of the storm, but given the rain that we're seeing here and the high winds that we've been experiencing here, we've been out here since 11 p.m. last night. And we've experienced some pretty good winds, and they're actually kicking up. We talked to the city manager, and he told us that they expect to see winds here about 85 miles an hour. We're not sure exactly what we're at right now, but again, they certainly are picking up, and so has the rain. I want to show you exactly what the wind has done here at our hotel. If you look up there behind me, those are the 3 flagpoles, and when we started out our evening here covering this story, there were 3 flags up there. There was the Comfort Inn flag on the pole to the left. That one blew off first. Then the American flag was on the middle pole. That blew off just a short time ago, and that's the state of Texas flag that is still hanging on, but barely. And I just want to show you here that we're happy to say we had a very courageous and I guess you could say patriotic producer. Henry Schuster ran out in the distance and captured the American flag, so it wasn't out there just blowing in the wind. So we're happy to report that. We are told that those flagpoles are about 10 feet into the ground, so we're hoping that they don't actually come out of the ground, but we are a little concerned about them snapping. What we've been seeing throughout the night here is just explosions, if you will, out in the sky. The transponders are blowing, power is being lost here around Baytown, and now we're starting to hear, as the winds kick up, a lot of clanking around, which means there's probably some debris and some things that could be flying around here. These palm trees have also taken a pretty good beating throughout the evening here with the storm. They were just planted back in January when this hotel opened, and the owner here is very concerned that they're going to go. Back in the distance there behind that is the pool actually for this hotel, and the pool furniture has been removed, but wow, there's some really good clanking around out here. We're getting a little concerned that things might be flying around. Can you hear that?
Yeah, we could hear that.
It's not that.
I wanted to ask you about the area there and all the oil refineries that are in that area. A lot of concern. Is the wind your problem now? How much rain are you getting there?
We're not getting, I mean, we are getting a fair amount of rain, but we're not seeing any flooding here. Although where the refineries are, there's about 200 refineries and oil plants. In fact, the largest one in the United States is right here in Baytown, the ExxonMobil plant. And Baytown sits right on the Houston Ship Channel, and that's that 50-mile stretch of waterway between the Houston port and the Gulf of Mexico. And so ships come in, they bring the oil that way, and then these plants would refine it and then send it back out through the pipelines. And they shut those plants down. We visited one, Catherine, just yesterday, the Shell plant in Deer Park, a short ways from here. And they were shutting down. They were only leaving about 20 employees out of 1,700 behind, just to make sure in case of emergency or a possible leak from the storm or from the damage. The high winds could cause it. They're also, the Shell plant's only about a mile from the channel. So, whoa.
Well,
okay.
as this hurricane whips around, it's going to be coming your way very soon.
Yeah.
All right, young lady, be careful.
There's definitely some debris that's loosening.
Okay, Randy, be careful.
Yeah, we should probably move in a little bit closer maybe to our
all right, we'll check back with you in just a little bit.
Okay, Randy, thank you. We are also keeping a close eye on Lake Charles in Louisiana, and CNN's Rick Sanchez is on the line with us right now. And Rick, as you know, the situation in Beaumont, Texas, where Anderson is, and in Lumberton, where Miles is, well, those two areas are deteriorating rather quickly from moment to moment. What's the situation like where you are in Lake Charles?
We're seeing a lot more than debris, as has been described. What we're seeing here is Category 1, Category 2 hurricane damage, or at least the origins of it, because it's going to be getting a whole lot worse. I'd be interested to hear from Chad what type of winds we're getting here now, because we're seeing some serious destruction being caused by the wind. In fact, we've witnessed it firsthand. Matt Hoy, my producer, and I moments ago decided to take our Hurricane 1 vehicle out just to try and survey the damage, and we saw a large tree fall in front of our car. Had we passed 2 seconds later, that vehicle or that tree, I'm sorry, would have fallen on top of the vehicle, and it was a big one of those big, large oak trees with, the very thick roots that come up out of the ground as well. We drove a little further down. That was on Broad Street, by the way, for those of you listening who are familiar with this area here around Lake Charles. Then we went down to Lakeshore Drive, down by the southern part of the lake, where they're expecting that they might get some flooding. And we did see already a lot of flooding on some of the low-lying areas over there. We had to turn the car around because we weren't able to continue because we were afraid to get, flooded out. So then we took another side road and found another tree that had fallen, taken part of the house down, all the fences and most of the power wires as well with it. So we got out of there, and now we're back in the downtown area. We've decided to keep the car in one place and wait till daylight because it's just, Tony, just too dangerous to be going out there.
Rick, stay with us. We're going to bring Chad up if we can. Chad, I know there were some tornado warnings out there. What exactly is going on in Lake Charles right now?
Well, there are tornado warnings for Lake Charles, not because there's a tornado, but because there is going to be tornado-like damage with winds of 100 to 120 miles per hour. So you can see some of that damage behind you. A 120-mile-per-hour wind, whether it's sustained or in a tornado, is the same as an F0 or an F1 tornado. So you are going to see tornadic-like damage from just the sustained winds in the storm itself. Some amazing pictures here.
Chad, let me tell you what we're seeing. We're sitting downtown, and we're looking at what appears to us to be the Civic Center here in St. Charles, and it's just coming apart. I'm not quite sure why they build buildings with glass panes, but they do, and this one has glass panes all around the front side of it, and we're watching as they literally are just being torn off, and they're then dancing in the wind. Huge, large pieces of glass flying around. The roof is now starting to get soaked, and it's starting to give way. The building is literally just coming undone before our very eyes, and you can see the inside of the building. All the stuff that they have inside the building is now just dancing around, including chandeliers and even palm trees that they had planted in there that are now coming apart as well, or coming down as well. So it's interesting to see. My experience tells me this is Category 2 damage now, structural damage of a serious nature, not just, small trees, small debris, shingles, but actual structural damage of serious and large buildings. Chad, would you agree?
I absolutely would, and I'm not sure you can see a television or not with CNN on it, but I want to show our viewers what's going on there in Lake Charles right now, because you are almost in the most dangerous part of the storm. Not quite, but the winds now on the northern eye wall are now into Cameron Parish. Quickly will be up into Lake Charles. Winds at least in excess of 100 miles per hour when it comes to gusts. In fact, we don't know what the winds are like, Rick, because the Weather Service office actually went down. The radar went down, either because of power or because of structural damage. And back out toward Beaumont and Port Arthur now, those western eye wall winds are coming all the way into Port Arthur, into Orange, and also back up to about Hackberry. So very damaging winds where you are for sure.
And Chad, it's funny, when we watch them, the winds seem to be coming in one direction, but then suddenly they stop and they start to swirl. And I'm not sure if that's part of the shelter effect that you get when you're downtown and you're around some tall buildings, but it seems like it almost stops and changes direction in mid-flight. And I'm not quite sure I understand the science of that, but it's not a consistent wind in one direction. It will be for a long period of time, but then it starts to swirl all of a sudden. Is there any explanation for that, Chad?
The explanation I could have for you was called mixing. As you start to get almost, remember we call it downdraft type damage at airports. They always care about this wind shear. As storms around this eye begin to collapse, they can actually push air straight down, especially with as much rain as you're getting. That rain is pushing air straight down to the ground, and when that air hits the ground, it can't go any farther because the ground's in the way, and it almost explodes when it gets to the ground, and that's why that wind begins to tumble, and those winds sometimes don't come from the same direction.
Wow. Okay, Chad, Rick, we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's give you
there, Rick.
Yeah, really. Stay safe out there to all of our people, and let's give you a reset of where we are.
That's right. As you know, we have several CNN correspondents on the ground with us throughout the night to give us a first-hand look exactly what Hurricane Rita is doing.
And right now, let's bring in our Miles O'Brien and Anderson Cooper from Texas. Miles joins us with the latest from Lumberton, and Anderson is in Beaumont. And let's start with you, Miles. Okay, how are you? How's your crew holding up?
Significantly worsening conditions here, Tony. The wind just in the past 5 minutes or so really started to pick up. This driving rain is something. I've covered a lot of hurricanes, and usually the rain comes and it goes, and there's little bands of rain, and then it kind of dries out. This has been a steady, non-stop deluge here, and I can just see the culvert behind me filling up as we speak. You can almost watch it rise. as the wind whips. That's the north, that's the south, that's Beaumont, about 15 miles away. That's where Anderson is.
Yeah, let's bring
counterclockwise swirl we talk about. And these gusts now, I've been trying to get a gauge on them. We're sustained in the 40, 50 mile an hour range, but the gusts are getting up there. Not quite sure where we are on that. It's in the meantime, we're not seeing too much additional damage. We've lost a sign over there at the Dairy Queen, some of that predictable stuff. Tree down there, and I'm just doing my best to make sure nothing comes and whacks me from that direction. I think we got a pretty clean shot there, so I should be okay.
Well, you know, I was curious about that as we were listening to Rick Sanchez. He was talking about this idea of debris and glass blowing around, and I was wondering if you were starting to see some of that in the area where you are, Miles, and we can bring Anderson in as well as. And Chad is there, you can see there in the lower right of your screen. And I'm wondering, Miles, first with you, are you starting to see any of the debris starting to blow around you?
Yeah, we're still in the tropical storm realm, and Chad will bear me out on this one. Just some of the types of signs you would expect to blow off in a tropical storm, small trees like that. And I suspect, Chad, how long it'll be before we start feeling that really get into hurricane force winds? Pretty soon?
Yeah, pretty soon, Miles, because now that you're on the north side of this, you're not going to get them as early as Anderson will, because you are a few miles north of him. But Anderson about to get them probably in the next 15 or 20 minutes, and you may be at least maybe even an hour before it actually picks up to 70 or 75.
I think Anderson might want to say he feels like the hurricane winds are already there. He's been taking quite a beating the last 5 minutes. Can you even hear us, Anderson?
Yeah, I can hear you. It is, and it's getting significantly worse. Literally, as I'm speaking, this is the worst we have seen. There's a lot of debris you were talking about. It's a lot of stuff like this, small twigs with leaves in it that are just whipping around, getting whipped off the trees. Really, minute by minute, I don't know how much of this you can see. The wind is just whipping all around me, and it's actually sort of a solid wall of white here. We've seen this before in hurricanes. Just about every hurricane at a certain point, and sort of the height of it, you look out and you actually see it like it's a solid mass. It is getting to be that point here. What we have done, I would actually suggest normally we would probably try to leave this area, but at this point we are going to stay here simply because it is too dangerous to try to drive to any other location. This is our fallback position. We had sort of planned for this to be the last place we would fall back to when things got really bad. My cameraman Dave is actually hiding behind the back of a vehicle, an SUV. We have another one. I'm just going to walk over here just to show you. We have another one here, which is, we've opened up the trunk, which has supplies and stuff. But we're basically using these two vehicles to block any oncoming debris that is coming this way because the wind is still sweeping up from the north. And it is so windy that you cannot even stare into the wind to see what is coming. So these vehicles really do block it and provide us with the kind of protection that we need. But it is, it was depressing to hear Chad saying that the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes, we're going to see a significant uptick because it has already gotten much worse in the last 5 minutes. I can only imagine what it is going to be now in these next couple of minutes. Chad, what kind of winds do you think we're seeing now?
That was a 77-mile-per-hour gust for you, Anderson. Sustained at 55, but we're only getting updates about every 10 minutes right now. And as this outer eye wall for you, which just really came through most here of Cameron Parish, as it moves into you, as it moves into your neighborhood, those numbers are going to start to go up for you. I suspect your sustained will go to 70 and your gusts will go to 90 literally in the next 20 minutes.
We've actually taken down the satellite dish because some debris hit the satellite dish, the satellite truck. So we're operating off a flyway, which is a much smaller satellite dish, and that's anchored to a pretty secure location. But it is, we talked to the chief of the fire chief here probably a couple hours ago, and he had said that they had not been getting many 911 calls. Most of the 911 calls they've been getting were people reporting possible fires, transformers exploding, the like. But it will be very interesting to see how Beaumont has fared tomorrow morning.
So, Alec, are you
I
on
wish we
headset?
could. I wish we could drive around to kind of get a sense of exactly, how the rest of the town is faring, but it's simply impossible to drive around right now. And you really can't, the street lights which we're on, there are actually a few street lights on over there, but for the most part, the streets are completely black. And it is very difficult to see anything. It's very difficult to get any kind of sense of, how the rest of Beaumont is doing. There has not been the kind of flooding in this area that some had thought there would be, but we're probably a good 20 feet off the Neches River, which is just to my right by about 300 yards or so. So we're going to continue staying in this location and try to ride out the height of the storm and hope it doesn't last too much longer. But I think it's going to be, what, Chad, at least an hour?
Probably an hour for you, yeah. Maybe a little bit less now. I believe the eye is very, very close to making landfall. You can see the north side of the eye. You can't pick out the south side of the eye because it doesn't exist here. But I think we'll probably get landfall called by the Hurricane Center actually pretty soon. As this part of the eye right there, as this moves to the north and makes its closest approach to Beaumont, it will go right over Bridge City, right over Port Arthur, and then even up to Lumberton where Miles is, but you're still at probably 45 minutes from that spot to the closest approach. But the eye itself, still about 2 hours for it to go by you and then up to the other side where you really start to calm down.
And Chad, have you been getting any reports about storm surges, not necessarily in this area, because I know this wouldn't be the first, but elsewhere? Any sense of any places that have been seeing bad storm surge?
Yeah, no, not at all. The only reports of really any damage was actually out of Rick Sanchez, and that was out of Lake Charles. We assume that there is a storm surge issue here coming into Lake Charles, coming through into Cameron Parish, eventually to Calcasieu Parish. There's the eye itself, the northern eye wall, all of this water being blown up into Cameron Parish, into Lake Charles, right through basically what is a bayou here. This entire area is very, very wet. That water getting pushed up into the rivers, into the streams, up into Lake Charles, up into Big Bridge City, up into Orange, up into West Orange, and even possibly even up into Port Arthur. But no levels so far coming up in Port Arthur that we know of, because the winds, in fact, are blowing offshore, blowing that wind and blowing that water away.
Okay, guys, stand by if you would, please. We want to change the scene just a bit and take you to Galveston. Standing by with us is Joel Eisenbaum of CNN affiliate KPRC. And Joel, give us a sense of the scene where you are.
Well, we're on the Gulf side of the island, and actually the wind is blowing outward toward the Gulf at this point. Keep in mind, this is a city, in fact, an entire island at this point, that has absolutely no power. It went out about 2 hours ago. The only way you have electricity, if you are on Galveston, is you have a generator. Amazingly, though, they've managed to maintain 911 service on Galveston, and sporadically we've seen police cars driving right up Seawall Boulevard. These are police and fire crews, in fact, that aren't necessarily from Galveston, but actually from Houston. They brought in extra trucks just to help out in case there are problems. And there have been a few problems here this evening. In fact, there was a fire involving 3 structures, one of them an historic structure, I understand. It may have been a down power line that started this whole thing. One person, I hear, was seriously injured. The mayor says at this point, 90% of the citizens managed to clear off of the island. With that being said, though, some of them did actually come back onto the island into the city of Galveston before the storm hit, because they just couldn't get far enough up the mainland. So they did, in fact, let some people come back to their homes. Let's send it back to you.
Okay, Joel Eisenbaum with our CNN affiliate KPRC in Galveston. Joel, thank you.
All right, we want to bring in now Miles O'Brien, who's in Lumberton, and find out what the situation is there. We were told, and Anderson Cooper is hanging in there in Beaumont. Miles, it looks like you're going to be getting what Anderson has been receiving the last few minutes. Things picked up where you are?
Yeah, I'm about 15 miles to the north, Catherine, and I suspect Anderson will be my best forecaster of weather to come shortly, that's for sure, with all due respect to Chad. But I need to tell you quickly what's going on here. The chief, Norman Reynolds here in the town of Lumberton, is out now, believe it or not, in a cruiser with some of his officers. They are responding to a report of a tree down in a house, a family of 5 in that house. We have no reports of any injuries, but apparently they need some assistance. As I said, you know, even though they were very pleased with this 90% evacuation, 10% is still, there are a lot of people in homes here who are enduring what is just the beginning of the worst to come. I mean, it's, I think Aaron Brown a little while ago said it was kind of the end of the beginning. That's a good way of putting it. This is the real heart of the matter now, and I don't know if Chad has a wind gauge. My wind gauge is already broken here, but I suspect we're getting into the 70-mile-an-hour range. We're probably on the edge of hurricane-force winds. Anderson, 15 miles that away. How are things going there?
It is definitely getting worse. Before it's going to get better, you know, Chad had talked about possibly next 10-20 minutes seeing a significant uptick. Without a doubt, minute by minute, it's getting worse here. I wish I had some better news to report, but anyone who is here in Beaumont, who is inside their house, who is listening to this, can just tell you from the sounds alone, they know this thing is getting bad. I don't have any wind equipment, so I can't tell you exactly what the wind is at. Miles had said that, Chad had said that there were wind gusts in the, I think it was in the 70 range, sustained winds in the 50 range. That feels about right, and we're anticipating that even getting much worse. But it is very difficult to get a sense of your surroundings. It is very difficult to see what is coming down the road, and I'm very curious to go over to the river's edge, but we're simply not going to do that for another couple hours just to see, you know, where things at. I'm sorry. Tony, I think you were...
Yeah, if I could, if we could just open up the mic. I just wanted to jump in for just a second, Anderson, to send it back to Chad Myers as we make this whole thing official at this very moment. Chad.
Yeah, we just talked to the Hurricane Center, and they did make it official. The eye has officially made landfall east of Sabine Pass and just to the west of Cameron in almost the Holly Beach area here, just as we expected, but literally they called it 2 minutes ago. So I want to let all the viewers know that the eye has at least made landfall now. That's some good news. Half the storm is onshore, half the storm offshore, but the most dangerous part is actually onshore. The south half of the storm, not nearly as big, not nearly as strong. But Anderson, you've got 45 more minutes, bud. Hang in there.
Now, what is the significance of the eye making landfall? I mean, in terms of the speed of this, it starts to weaken really as soon as it does make landfall, correct?
It does actually when you start to cut off the source of heat, the source of energy, which is the water. When you cut it off to more than half the storm begins to really spin down. Now, there's also another problem with spinning down. Sometimes spinning down with the friction of land can shrink the eye wall, at least briefly, before it completely collapses. That shrinking is like an ice skater bringing her arms in, and that ice skater will actually go faster, and the storm can briefly go faster right at landfall and then start to fall apart. So that's the significance there, Anderson.
And do you have any sense of what the wind speed was at the time it made landfall?
I don't. All I know, the highest number that we have was from Calcasieu Pass, which is right about there, and that was 112 miles per hour.
Wow. Well, it's certainly nowhere near that here, but you know, if I didn't know better, if I hadn't done a couple of these and hadn't learned so much from you, Chad, I would say it feels that strong here. But as you know, it always feels worse, I guess, than it really is.
Right. Yeah, and right now your winds are still at about 77 for miles per hour in gusts, getting up to sustained about 62. So you're still inching your way up to your peak about 45 minutes from now.
Chad, we've seen when these storms hit land and that eye hits land, there's almost a temporary respite from the storm. If you happen to be in the location where that eye is passing over, that's not going to happen for Anderson, is it?
It is not. He will never be in the eye, and that's the point. We didn't really want our reporters and anchors in the eye, and so the eye itself right here. I have bad news for anybody who was trying to ride it out here in Holly Beach. There's not much left of that beach area at this point with the storm surge coming on shore here, probably in the neighborhood of 8, possibly 14 feet as the storm made its way on up toward Lake Charles and still is making its way toward Lake Charles at this hour. I'm going to flatten the map so maybe you can see it just a little bit better, and you can kind of get an idea of where that eye is, where Port Arthur is, and where Beaumont is. The big red area that you see there, that is actually a tornado warning in effect. The Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service put their eyes together, put their heads together, and say, you know what, 120 miles per hour is just as bad as any tornado, so let's issue a tornado warning, even though there's no real spin to any of the storms.
Hey, Chad, if we could, in the back, let's put up all these. Oh, there they are. All the pictures are up. So you've got Anderson, you've got Miles there. There you are. But what I want for you to explain to us, you said a moment ago that the strongest, most severe part of this storm is likely to pass very close to Lake Charles.
Correct.
As you look at those pictures of Anderson being buffeted, of Miles being buffeted, how bad is it in Lake Charles?
Well, we just talked to Rick Sanchez. Buildings are coming down. I mean, literally, buildings are falling apart in those winds, in those Category 2, possibly even to a Category 3 wind gusts up here in Lake Charles under the word light right there. This right now is a very dangerous part of the storm. That's moving into Orange, into Port Arthur itself, and as this storm pulls on up to the north, Anderson is going to be on the very western fringe of this thing, literally in 15 or 20 minutes. So you want to see what it's like?
Yeah.
We'll wait 20 minutes. We'll see what it's like at Anderson's location.
Well,
it's definitely going to get worse.
And I can add this, as we go to Miles, I can add this. We are trying to get crews established and get shots established out of Lake Charles, and we simply can't.
No. You know what? The Weather Service is out of business. The power's out. Something got knocked down. The radar doesn't work anymore. So obviously there was significant structural damage in Lake Charles this evening, and just literally 20, 30 minutes ago.
Let's get Miles back in here, who's in Lumberton.
Yeah, right about there.
Yep, north, just a little bit north of where Anderson. Miles, you broke your wind gauge already.
I broke the wind gauge. That didn't take long. I guess you live and learn on those things. Should have gotten a little beefier one, I guess. I don't know if they make one that is going to sustain this kind of wind.
Well,
I mean, and Chad, what's the wind rating here in Lumberton right now? What are you seeing?
Well, you know, there's not a Weather Service office there in Lumberton, but I think you're probably in the 52, maybe 53 range. Officially, if we take an average of Beaumont on up to another spot north of there, it's kind of interpolation. We're saying 47 for you, Miles.
Okay, but it's gusted pretty bad, like right there.
Well, the gusts down in Beaumont were 77, so your gusts could easily be 67 to 70.
That's getting close. That's got to get right there. That's got to be close to the 70s, I think. But I've got to think about I hope we've been in touch with Rick Sanchez. Just the thought of that situation there in Lake Charles. Sounds good.
I think we're losing Miles. He is starting to get what Anderson had, and that's Houston, a live shot from Houston there also in the screen for you. Anderson, can you still hear us? And I want to ask you, you seem to always be in the worst end of these storms. I've been sitting on this anchor desk through half a dozen of these hurricanes in the middle of the night. You are always in the worst of it. How would you compare what you're experiencing now to some of the other hurricanes that we've seen over the last year?
Well, you know, it's hard to compare. Everyone is different. You know, what's been interesting about this storm is that for so long, you know, I think we've been out here, I don't know, 7-8 hours or so. For the first 6 or 7 of those hours, I don't want to say it didn't feel so bad, because it was certainly, you know, high winds and terrible things can happen in high winds. But it felt sort of within the realm of experience. What we are feeling now is something I don't know that I have experienced thus far. You know, I have probably been in storms that are stronger than this, but maybe it is a combination of the location that we're in, the fact that the electricity around here is completely gone, and we are down to basically just one light. It feels like, it just feels a little bit, it feels different, and it feels a different level of intensity, probably more intense than other storms I've covered recently. I don't know, I'm probably not explaining myself very well, but there's something about being here in the darkness and not knowing what else is out there. It is very disconcerting, I must say.
Anderson, you always explain yourself well, and I really don't think anyone can understand what it's like unless they're standing where you are right now.
Well, and not many people are, because it's pretty, you know, it's not a wise thing to be doing unless you sort of prepared for it, unless you have a reason to be doing it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, thank you, Anderson, and boy, we'll come back to you in just a couple of moments, but I want to bring in Rob Marciano. And Rob, I was half hoping that you were getting some rest. You've got a busy day ahead of you, but I guess it's hard to really get some rest up there in Beaumont with the elements that are swirling around you right now. Give us a sense of what the conditions are like. We can see, my goodness, we can see Miles out in it. We can see Anderson out in it. What is it like from your vantage point?
Well, I'm in the emergency control center, basically, of Beaumont, Texas, the Entergy building, which is the company that runs the power around here. It's a 12-story, very fortified building. Does have glass windows, but now the glass windows are being blown out on certain sides of the building, and everybody that's been using this building as a shelter has been told to move to stairwells and to the interior sections of this building. There are paramedics, there are firefighters, there are electrical crews here, and other emergency managers that have used this as a command center, including the mayor, because it's thought to be the strongest building in town. But now as the eye wall comes through, nobody's getting sleep. Everyone's been woken up, if they have at all been able to sleep, and told to move to the center part of the building. So I'm looking down now from the floor. Yeah.
Rob, I have to ask you, you're in the shelter. You're being buffeted by these winds. I mean, what is it like to be in a building, and are you sure, I guess you're not, if the windows are being blown out, whether or not this shelter that you're in will be able to withstand the even more intense winds that are coming?
Well, you just have to trust engineering. I can tell you this. The crew and I were discussing whether or not the eye itself was going to come over the building. We were lying down near one of the support columns, and the support column was creaking, back and forth and back. You could feel the building swaying back and forth and back and forth. And the only reassurance we had is, of course, that the buildings are engineered to sway in the wind somewhat. Right. And I said, Tony, once you hear that creaking stop, that means the winds have stopped, and maybe we'll be right in the eye, and then it'd be calm for at least a little bit. But I don't think we're going to get a piece of that from what I've been hearing. We're in the western eye wall, and we are looking. I am near a window, and it does get buffeted, but we're looking downwind. So I'm hoping that nothing swirls this way, and this window won't get blown out. But to see, I just can't imagine what Anderson is going through down there.
Exactly, Rob. It's amazing to think he's actually standing in the middle of what you are seeing outside your window. Anderson's in Beaumont, and we had Miles, who is in Lumberton, and hopefully seeking some shelter as the winds pick up there in Lumberton. And then below him on the screen, you're looking at a live shot from a tower cam in Houston. Anderson, let's ask you, do you have anything you want to ask Rob? He's in a shelter that is getting smashed right now from this storm.
Anderson, I'll tell you this.
How do I get there?
Rob, did you hear that?
Yeah, I did. Listen, we two members of the crew were nearly swept away trying to get from our vehicles into the shelter. This was 2-3 hours ago when the storm was much weaker. So Anderson, I know where you are. Keep your back to that wall and just ride this baby out. That's a safer place than you trying to get to where we are. Just going to and from any sort of, and you just can't drive. So just stay where you are. Keep your back to that brick wall and ride it out.
I appreciate it. That is good advice. We had discussed the idea of taking on the road, but frankly, with all the debris out there, you don't want to get stuck on a road like that in one of these vehicles. It can flip very easily. So we're just going to stay here and ride it out right here on the air. And if we get knocked off the air, we're just going to continue to stay in this location because it is really not worth at this point trying to go anywhere else. That building that Rob is in, we scouted a little bit earlier today. It is a very well-constructed building, as Rob said. Basically, a lot of paramedics and fire department people are there. It's a well-supplied building. That is one place we would have tried to get to, but at this point, we've lasted this long here. I think we're fine. We're going to be fine. It's just a question of riding this out and waiting until the winds die down enough for us to get to a different building or to go back to where we're going to try to stay tonight.
All right. We also want to tell you we brought in a shot from Galveston now, right underneath Anderson. That's what it's looking like right now in Galveston, Texas.
And Rob, are you still there?
Still here, Johnny.
Okay, just a couple of quick questions, and then we want to bring Miles in as well. I can barely see him up there in that shot. But, Rob, how many people are in that shelter, and are we talking about individuals? Are we talking about families?
Are there families here as well? It's quite a mishmash of people, but most of them, from the gear that surrounds the people that are lying or have been lying on the floor, they're here for a reason. They're not here because they live down the street and they were seeking shelter. Most of those folks that Tony had headed out of town. So everybody who's in this shelter is here for a reason. They're here because when the storm passes, they've got work to do. They hope to get some sleep tonight, but nobody's doing that at all.
Can you see a monitor? Can you see our air?
No. I was able to. We had some battery-operated TVs. I was able to watch some of the local channels off some rabbit ears to see where the eye was coming on shore a couple hours ago, and it looked like we weren't going to get a break. It looked like we were going to be in the western end of it, and looked like Orange, Texas, and Sulphur and Lake Charles, Louisiana were